If you've been following our channel, you'll probably know how much I value a good trigger. It not only helps you put accurate rounds down range, but a good trigger just feels satisfying. It's like a good 6-speed gearbox or perfectly weighted mechanical keys. We've looked at the legends of airsoft, the High Kappa, the 1911, the Glock, and we know that those are excellent triggers, but what else is out there? Well, we might have found something that should keep High Kappas up at night in a cold sweat. Something that Glocks will whisper to other Glocks around the campfire. The Shadow in the night. It is of course the SP01 Shadow ACCU edition, and it just might be the best stock trigger we have ever seen. Before we dive further into this review, I want to sort through the somewhat confusing lineup and naming convention of KJW CZ pistols. Now, it's easy to assume that CZ stands for Czech or Czechoslovakia, the origin country, but it's actually short for CZUB, which stands for Česká zbrojovka Uherský Brod, which simply means Czech Arms Factory in the town of Uherský Brod. Creative name, I know. The original CZ75 came out in 1975. This is the KJW KP09, and at under $200 Canadian, in my opinion, is one of the best CO2 values on the market right now. From that original design spawned two different directions, the P09 and the SP01. The P09 was designed to be a carry pistol with lightweight polymer frame, low profile controls, and interchangeable backstraps. Here is the KJW P09 with threaded barrel in urban gray. Now the SP01 was more of a target pistol, which would later evolve into the SP01 Shadow shown here. It's generally regarded as being so good, you could take it brand new out of the box and compete in a competition that same day. As for magazines, the P09 only accepts P09 magazines, whereas the SP01 shares the same mag as the KP09, with the only difference being the base plate. The SP01 Shadow was then further refined into the Shadow ACCU edition, which we have here, characterized by the barrel bushing system up front and the adjustable match trigger. It's the priciest option at about $50 more than the standard SP01, so let's see just how good that trigger is. The trigger itself is a hybrid flat trigger. It's got a nice wide flat surface for a consistent feel, but also has a little lip at the bottom as a landmark. The ACCU also has a single action only trigger as opposed to the double action single action on the Shadow. This typically allows for a more direct and cleaner reset. The standard Shadow has one adjustment screw to adjust over travel after the break. The ACCU has that same screw and also a second one to adjust take up or dead travel. I've tuned it to the point where if I adjusted it any further, the trigger wouldn't break or it wouldn't reset. Check it out. There's about 1 millimeter of take up before tension begins. Tension builds up smoothly over the next couple millimeters until the trigger breaks exactly at the end of travel. Naturally, once tuned, there is no over travel. Reset is back at the start of travel and clicks with a nice tactile feedback exactly where travel ends. Let's compare it to the standard SP01 Shadow. There's about 2 millimeters of take up before tension starts. Then there's a second stage, which is likely the double action mechanism. From there, there's still a bit of travel until the break. This one has that over travel screw, so there's no over travel either. Reset is still nice and tactile, but there's a little bit of travel after that reset. Finally, compare that to the standard CZ75. 3 millimeters of take up now, and then there's that same second stage from the double action mechanism. Break feels the same as the other two, but because of that extra over travel, the trigger sort of jumps a little after the break. This small movement is enough to affect accuracy. Reset is just as clicky, but there's even more over travel after than the Shadow. Look, at the end of the day, even the CZ75 has quite a decent trigger, but if you're like me and a good trigger really makes you smile, the ACCU is hands down the best stock trigger I've ever seen. It's hard to capture on camera, but if you get the chance, give it a pull and I think you'll see what I mean. Let's talk about what else is different on the ACCU edition. The first thing you'll probably notice is the bright metal grips as opposed to the contoured rubber grips. It has a little section of grip tape that kind of feels like it was ripped straight off of a skateboard, but of course that's not necessarily a bad thing. They do line up pretty well with your fingertips and provides quite a nice grip, though naturally can feel a little bit abrasive. The grip panels are milled out to fit that grip tape, so it is flush to the grip panel. The good news is swapping out the grip panels is as simple as one screw. Moving up top, the ACCU features fiber optic sights along with a blank rear sight versus the 3-dot sights you'll find on the Shadow. A 1-dot sight is typically more common on competition pistols as it's easier to track a single dot than 3 trying to compete for your attention. Up front, like I mentioned, the ACCU features a barrel bushing system quite similar to the 1911. The idea here is it takes out some of that barrel play, generally improving consistency. It's a good thing they come with a barrel bushing removal tool because this thing is mad tight. Looking at barrel play though, it certainly works. I have never seen a pistol with this little barrel play. Here's the standard barrel for comparison. However, because it is so tight, it does cause some friction and you can really hear it against the machine barrel. It's worth noting that even though the slides are different because of that barrel bushing, the actual barrels can be swapped if you like the threaded barrel. In fact, the entire slide can be swapped over and the gun will function fine. If you so desire, you can even put the ACCU slide on the original CZ75, which is actually a pretty cool look. Diving into the internals now, simply line up the notch at the back of the slide and pop out that slide release like the 1911. The ACCU has a metal spring guide that meshes with the barrel bushing, but otherwise internals are more or less the same. One of the reasons CZ75s are such accurate pistols is the sheer size of the slide rails. It runs more than half the length of the entire pistol and should hold the slide tight. Also, check out the trigger bar, often referred to as the trigger bow. On a lot of pistols, this part is much thinner and sometimes runs only on one side like the Glock. If there's any flex here, it will translate to the trigger, so I'm glad this one is a nice chunk of metal. The shake test results weren't the best, and I found 2 main sources of noise. The magazine has a little bit of play, and the slide has a little bit of side-to-side play. However, to be fair, the slide was really tight up and down, and because of those long slide rails, is pretty tight all the way down the gun. In the hands, the first thing most of us said was, wow, that is a pretty heavy pistol. On our scales, it comes in at 1.18 kilograms, which is actually more than the real one at 1.09 kilograms, though I do suspect most of that weight comes down to the magazine. For way of reference, it's a little bit heavier than the standard SP01 Shadow, and almost 50% heavier than the polymer cousin, the P09. It's also almost 2 Umarex Glocks. Giving it the balance test, the ACCU is actually very well balanced, with the balance point being right under the trigger undercut. Looking at ergonomics, the best way I can describe it is it's kind of like a bucket seat on an exotic sports car. It's almost like the gun wants to sink into your hands. Every curve and every cut is well thought out, and you can really see why this gun is so popular without even shooting it. CZ pistols are also famous for having a very low bore axis, so even with raised sights, the sights are pretty much what you'll be used to from other pistols. The one downside is there's not much slide to grab onto, but it does have pretty aggressive serrations. Personally, the one gripe I have is the safety. I mean, it's in a good spot and it's comfortable, but it also forces you to place your thumb on top. I've spoken about how I don't like gripping a 1911 on top of the safety because it changes your grip pistol to pistol, and this is no different. I wish they had kept the low profile original CZ75 safety. Onto the range now. Velocity starts at just over 380 feet per second and levels out to about 350. Efficiency was about average, and each CO2 lasted 50 to 60 shots. Shooting at some targets now, the ACCU had no trouble hitting these smaller targets. Immediately, shooting the gun felt very natural. I just loved the sights. Even on the lowest hop-up setting, it seemed to overhaul .2s, so definitely consider running 2.8s. Where this gun really shines though is double tap. Super quick and super clean, this thing is a double tap machine. Let's see if I can hit this little target hanger. It's not quite as accurate as the SMC9 we just reviewed, but I still managed to hit it a few times. As far as shooting feel goes, it cycles very nicely. The kick is strong as expected for CO2, but because of that friction from the barrel bushing, it wasn't quite as snappy as I would have liked. Overall, every time I bring this gun onto the range, this pistol just feels right at home. It's designed to be shot and to shoot well. And there you have it, the KJW SP01 Shadow ACCU Edition. I think that this is a really good pistol, but I also know that it's not for everyone. For one, it's quite heavy. If it's going to be in your holster more often than not, then it's just dead weight. Going back to car analogies, this gun is a little bit like the Porsche GT3 RS. Amazing on the track, but for everyday use, it's just not the most practical. This gun is built for the range, and for things more important on the field, like excellent controls, aggressive all-weather grips, and even the ease of racking, this gun just falls a little bit short. But again, if you're looking for an amazing trigger and something that is a little bit more unique, then I think this pistol is very much worth the price of admission. As always, thanks so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll catch you on the next one.